Hey there, fellow citizen of the internet. Welcome to the Moses Kabandana Podcast. Today I have with me Ellen. Is it Bush or Butch?
Bush like the beer, like Anheuser-Busch.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. My cousin likes that likes that beer. Welcome to the Moses Kabandana Podcast. Today we're gonna try to learn a bit from your story, and so just real quick, introduce yourself, and we're gonna dive into your story.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me on as a guest. I am a recently published author. I wrote Disempowered, but the DIS is crossed out. And it is my story of overcoming the label and stigma of dyslexia and also overcoming trauma and learning to heal and grow and learning to thrive through conventional means, working with coaches and therapists, but also through adventure and taking on challenges.
Mm,
So,
mm. Taking on challenges.
mhm.
So real quick, do you know the story of how dyslexia has been viewed as historically? Meaning
Yeah.
like you touched on the stigma and whatnot, but like maybe 100 or 200 years ago, like was there some sort of what's wrong with that person, or like is there some sort of demonic possession or anything like that?
Yeah. Fortunately, it wasn't that bad.
Okay,
Back in the
okay.
1800s, I've done a lot of research. So, back in the
Mm,
1800s, I believe it was in the UK, there were some physicians who noticed children were having difficulty learning to read. And it
mm,
was originally thought of as a vision issue, not a
mm,
processing difference. So then, as
mm,
we learned and grew, um, it became apparent that we just process things differently.
yeah.
Unfortunately, it is associated with an intellectual disability and is often thought of as somebody is lazy or they're not paying attention.
Mm,
So there's a lot of stigma that comes with it. And it's so ironic because when I was given the WIS test, which is a intelligence test, and it has many different
mm,
categories, um, in logic, I scored in the 98th percentile, and in abstract reasoning, excuse me,
mm.
it's a little hay fever around here in the falls.
All good, all good.
In an abstract reasoning, I scored in the 99th percentile, and my
Mm,
IQ was well above average. So, but that
okay.
wasn't really considered. It was more they focused on my weaknesses and not my strengths. And
Mm,
I was treated as a second class citizen.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, I was really written off. My parents were told in a parent teacher conference that college was out of the question and that they should focus on finding me a husband to take care of me.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
Man, well, that's a good place to start with your parents.
Hmm.
Do you know much of how they handled well, one, getting this expert opinion from from teachers and whatnot,
Right.
and just like how did they manage that to the degree that you can remember?
Sure. I remember quite a bit of it actually, and I wrote about it. My parents just didn't accept that. They just
Okay,
didn't, yeah,
okay.
they just said that parent teacher conference ended with my mother pounding her fist on the desk saying, "I refuse to allow you
Mm,
to condemn my daughter."
mm,
So they went
yeah,
to
yeah.
work.
Okay, who are they? What's their background? Because it's not
Sure.
the average individual that quote unquote challenges an authoritative figure, because you would
Sure.
assume that if a teacher is saying that, chances are he or she has seen uh, other students who ended up not pursuing tertiary education for the same or similar reasons.
Sure.
And so, like, you have to be the kind of person that has the temperament to be like, yeah, no, I'm going to dismiss your opinion and do my own research, or step outside of what is
Right.
known. So,
Right.
who were your parents?
Well, my mom was an Irish Catholic, 5'3" dancer, ballet
Hmm.
dancer from Brooklyn.
Okay.
So,
Brooklyn. Brooklyn.
so
Okay.
she was tough. She was very, very tough. And in the late 50s, early 60s, when my parents met, my mother worked for Volkswagen. When the Volkswagen bug hit the market, and that was a huge thing, and
Yeah.
she was responsible for all of the distribution of all the vehicles that came into New York City and the Mid-Atlantic states. She was the highest ranked and highest paid woman in the firm. So
Amazing.
very, very uncommon then. My
Mm.
my dad worked for Con Edison, which is a powered lighting company for the New York City area, and he was a trainer and a teacher himself. So he ran
Mm.
all of their training schools. They had a driving school, diesel school, electronics school. So he was an industrial instructor.
Mm.
So,
Mm.
and he was also dyslexic. He was also an Army veteran. So
Mm. Mm.
he had a presence, and he owned the room. He was a big, loud man.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
So suffice to say that both your parents um, were not new to people trying to tell them no.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Hmm.
Okay. So they take no for an answer, of course. And what does the next year or two look like as far as your education?
It was Elementary school was traumatic for me. Um,
Okay.
it was a dangerous, hostile environment. I had a few good teachers, thank God,
Mm.
but the whole attitude was that I was never going to be academically successful.
More from the student side, or like from the instructors?
From the administrators and the special education teachers. So I'll give you an
Okay.
example. I was originally diagnosed as ambidextrous. And when
Okay.
somebody is ambidextrous, you don't necessarily have a dominant eye. And the belief system at that time was that you couldn't learn to read without a dominant eye. So they actually held me back 2 years from
Mm.
to begin to learn to read. So at what point is this a self-fulfilling prophecy too? So
Yeah. Yeah.
they created this situation. So
Mm.
my parents did everything they could to support me. My mom pretty much embedded herself in the classroom. She became very close with my first
Mm.
teacher, who was wonderful.
Okay.
I don't know if they still do it, but my mom became a class mom, so she was
Mm.
involved in everything. And then
Yeah.
she would
Yeah.
help me with my homework every night, which usually ended up
Mm.
in tears with
Mm.
frustration.
Mm. From you,
And
from her?
from me,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
just the level of frustration that I was dealing with would bring me to tears on a daily basis. It
Mm.
was
Mm.
it
Right.
was
Right.
really
Right.
hard. In addition to that, because I was different from the other students, I was terribly bullied.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah. So I would often come home from school in tears.
Mm.
It was
Mm.
traumatic, and my self-esteem and self-worth were destroyed. But my
So,
dad. Oh, go ahead.
I want to, before we jump too far ahead,
Sure.
you mentioned dominant eye.
Hmm.
I don't think I've ever been exposed to that concept. So you're telling me just the same way that I'm right-handed, I have a right hand dominance. Same for the foot. You're saying that I have a left or right dominant eye?
That's correct.
Well, how am I supposed to know which one it? I don't know which one it is.
Right, right.
Oh,
Well, most people don't because usually it's if you're right-handed, your right eye is dominant. That's if you're left-handed, your left eye is dominant. It's usually
oh,
associated. Most people who know which eye is dominated are it's is when it's associated with marksmanship
okay,
because you have to look
okay,
through a sight. So
right, right.
if you're using a firearm,
Hmm,
if you're if you're doing archery, you're going to find out which eye is dominant just
right.
because it's just part of that process. So
Oh, I
yeah,
okay. Not to dance on this topic a bit
sure.
longer than it needs to, but I'm really fascinated fascinated by
Yeah,
this. So I think I might. So because I'm right-handed, and I'm most likely left eye dominant.
I
Is
think
that the
you.
trend?
My understanding is that you'd likely be right eye dominant if it's your right hand.
Right eye dominant. Okay,
Yes. Yeah.
okay.
Now,
Huh.
some people have what's called cross dominance. So in my
Mm,
case, I am left handed now. I
hmm.
don't even know if that's an accurate statement because of the ambidextrous diagnosis,
Right.
but my right eye is dominant. So I have what's called cross
Mm,
dominance. And the only reason I
okay.
know that is because I've had some firearms training.
Ah,
Hmm.
okay. Okay, that makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah.
I think I might have had that cross-eye dominance thing because well, I'm definitely speaking out of my rear end here, but I had um what was it? Eye test thing
Hmm.
in high school
Yeah.
because my right eye seemed to be just ever slightly blurrier than my
Okay.
left. And so
Sure.
I went in, they did some testing, and it just turned out that my right eye was, well, 2020. It's just that my left eye was 2015. So
Interesting.
my left eye was better than 2020, and so just it made it. I was playing airsoft a lot at that time. It's kind of like paintball or something like that.
Sure.
And looking down the scope, like you said, right?
Right.
Um, all of a sudden, you're like, hey, it looks better. It looks much clearer and sharper looking through my left. And so now they've kind of equalized a bit. If
Hmm.
not, I just did this test a year and a half ago, trying to get my third class pilot's license, medical. And so when I was doing that test, we found out that I think the left eye has gotten worse now. So it went from 2015 to 2020. Now it might need correction in the near future, which is just
Interesting.
so whatever this cross dominance thing is.
Hmm.
I started on one end and I'm slowly drifting to the other
Interesting.
end.
Yeah.
So okay, sorry for taking this
No, no, no. That's okay.
shortcut,
Yeah.
this detour. It's just super interesting to me. Okay, so bullying in childhood, elementary school. Uh, I wrote down that because I wanna know a little bit more about like where I've never done the bullying nor been bullied in that age range,
Hmm.
and so I'm kind of curious, like for those that have been on one side of the fence or the other,
Yeah.
what what did that do to you as far as your image of other kids? Because when we think about elementary school kids, we're thinking angels, right? But
Hmm.
then at the same time, we know that these angels also have a demonic element to them. So
Yeah.
from the receiving end of this demonic manifestation, if we can even put it that way, what is it like?
Um, I was really the brunt of just pure cruelty.
Mm,
I mean,
mm,
these were girls, and this was first and second grade, and it went on for about 2 years. And they just went out of their way to be cruel. You know,
really, at that age?
at that age, yes.
Ah,
It, it was hurtful, and it made me
yeah.
not want to have close friends other
Mm,
than,
mm,
in my family,
right, right.
Um, it was verbal and sometimes physical.
Okay.
But more physical at kind of like destroying my artwork or
Oh,
knocking down whatever destroying what I was working on.
yeah, yeah.
Really a lot of name calling, a lot of, and there were times where I was cornered. Yeah, it was
Okay.
absolutely traumatic. So in the classroom, I have these administrators who are treating me like a second class citizen. And then I have these, my fellow students are just, cruel and mean at every opportunity. It was so
So in
bad.
that,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
So it was so bad that, I brought it to my parents. They tried to teach me to be above it and tried to help me deal with it, but it just kept getting worse. And, then once the teacher got involved, that certainly was helpful, but she can't watch over you, constantly. She's got other students. So anytime her
Yeah.
back was turned, they went right back to it. And then the parents had to get involved. It got that bad. And then once the parents got involved, they were able to stop it. But those people were never my friends. They
Right.
couldn't
Right.
continue to lash out at me, but they could ignore me, and they did.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like you had adults and kids were basically different sides of the same coin, right? As far as you were concerned.
Yeah.
Man, that's interesting because when I was at that age, yeah, I mean it's completely different environment, right? It wasn't necessarily a school environment, but from the boys' side of things, the if there was any sort of bullying that took place, it was hardly ever the verbal type. Even at that age, right? It was more of, okay, we're going to exclude you from. We love to do a lot of flips and whatnot, or we played marbles a lot, right? So if it wasn't physical in the sense of, well, I'm going to punch you in the face type, again, even at that age, it was more of, okay, we're going to exclude you from the activities that
Right.
we do, right?
Right.
So it's interesting that it's happening at this age on the girl side verbally, because from where I'm standing and from the little that I know, that doesn't change
Right.
between the girls and the boys into adulthood. Women still tend to be more verbose, and then they take that and apply to, if you're going to be bullying and whatnot, you still end up being the verbal
The
manipulation
verbal.
part
Yeah.
than the physical.
Right.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so did you ever reconnect with any one of your early childhood bullies?
I am connected with one on Facebook.
Okay.
I thought it was really interesting. This person reached out to me to connect, and I just accepted the friend request, but there
Yeah.
really hasn't been any conversation. And the only reason I did that was because I was curious, and I knew I was working on the book at the time,
Okay.
and I I was just curious to see what that person's reaction would be when the book came out. So, but there hasn't really been any conversation. So, and I don't really
Okay.
need to. I
Okay.
don't really need to have one. I'm not really interested in having one. And that's fine. I've just moved past it at this point. So,
Yeah. Who knows what's happening on their end?
right.
Okay. So this is elementary school. What does middle school and high school look like? I can only
Things,
imagine.
yeah, I still struggled academically. So,
Uh-huh.
so I'm going to back up a little bit. So once I
Okay. Yeah.
finally learned to read, once they let me start to learn to read. I was 2 years behind my peers. I mean, that was the reality. And
Right.
fortunately, I could read. And I caught up 2 or 3 years in just a few months.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
So again, it just lends itself to, how much of this was a self-fulfilling prophecy for them and how much
Yeah.
of this is really an issue. It's just, and we don't understand the brain enough to really know. So to answer your question, things got better, and I learned I was never mainstreamed completely until I went to college.
Okay.
So I
Okay.
had I had math and English where I was in special education, and then for the other classes I was in the regular classroom. So
What excuse me, what were
Sure.
the contributing factors to improving things so well between middle school and high school?
I worked hard. I had to
Okay, no
figure out,
shortcuts.
yeah, I had to figure out how to make the classroom work for me, even though it wasn't designed for me.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
and one of the things that I did was I learned that I could outwork everybody. And I was driven, just completely driven. My dad was my big cheerleader. He'd say, Ellen,
Awesome.
prove them wrong, you can do it. And he taught me about micro goals, taking on one question at a time. My parents also got me a tutor, so I had support outside of the classroom. But I'm fortunate that my parents had the resources to do that. Not everybody does.
Right. Right. Right.
So things got
Ah,
better socially as I moved through the system.
okay.
And I played a lot of sports too, and that was a really important outlet for me. And I also had some success.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Let's talk about that success. What does that mean?
sure. So it was one place I could build self-esteem and self-worth.
In sports?
In sports, and also at age 15, my dad sent me on Outward Bound,
Okay.
which was probably the best thing he ever did for me. It changed the trajectory of my life because I got out there and I learned that I was a natural leader and nobody knew I was dyslexic. And I got to be just a 15-year-old girl. And I led
Amazing.
my boat crew. I did 2 weeks whitewater rafting, hiking, climbing, and rappelling. And I led my boat crew. I led my group when we were on hikes. I just was a natural leader. And I had never had the opportunity to have that kind of success until I went on Outward Bound. Or unless I was on the soccer field or when I played field hockey. So it was critically important. And that's why my father sent me. He knew how important it was. And then at 17, he asked me if I wanted to get certified to scuba dive. And I
Okay.
nearly jumped out of my skin with excitement. And this was many years ago. But
Yeah.
I was a minor. And we had to get special permission, and my mother had to sign the paperwork because I was under 18.
Right.
So, and that was a huge challenge. And I fell in love with that, and I've done probably around 300 dives so far, and I've done some interesting
Wow.
dives. Yep,
That is amazing.
yep. But
Ah,
overcoming those challenges and learning to persevere and having success outside of the classroom was absolutely mission critical for me.
okay. So social life gets a little bit better, or quite a lot better in comparison to elementary. This is
Yeah.
middle school and high school. Your academics start to improve, partly as a result of having outside of the classroom support, but heavily related to how much work that you put in, right?
Mm-hmm.
No shortcuts, and now you're starting to taste something that you didn't even know that you had, which is leadership, right?
Right.
And that's something that takes a long time to be taught, and um, too much money gets put into trying to make people leaders. But it seems
Right.
that you had a natural inclination to this, and
Yeah.
so all these things put together, what did they do to you? I know we kind of already just touched on it, but
Sure.
all these things coming together within a relatively short, unquotes, period of time. How did that dictate what college ended up being?
Yeah. So I was steered away from college by the school system, and I just said no. I'm going.
Hmm.
At that point, I had nothing to lose because there were no expectations for me to be successful, and my
Mm,
parents
mm,
supported
mm.
me.
Yeah.
And I knew I needed to go to a school that had some support system for people who are dyslexic. And as it turned out, I did go, I did graduate. I also have a master's degree. But
Awesome.
yeah, so I beat them by their own standards. Um, but when I went into college, I started out needing support. But as I moved through the bachelor program, I needed less and less support. And by the time I got to my senior year, I didn't need any support.
Interesting.
But
Okay.
yeah,
Wow. Huh. So let me come back to this dyslexia. I don't think I've given enough attention to it.
sure.
Um, are there degrees of severity as far as how dyslexic someone is? It sounds like a dumb question in my head, but I gotta ask that.
Sure. That's a great question. I would have to say yes, kind of like we see the autism spectrum, but I'm not an
Mm-hmm.
expert, and I would
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
defer to an expert. So,
Okay.
um,
Okay.
yeah.
So I asked that because when I think I started to notice it, um, probably fourth grade, fifth grade. Don't associate the grade with the age because
Sure.
a little backstory here. I was born in Rwanda. I grew up in Mozambique. So
Oh,
by the time I learned how to read, I don't even remember how old I was. I don't know, 8 or 9 or something. So
okay.
it took me a minute. When I would be reading or trying to read, I distinctly remember almost always the last word of a paragraph or a sentence or the page, and there was increasing difficulties in where this was. So if it was the last word of a sentence, I could freeze on it for like 3 or 4 seconds, right? But if it was the last word of the page, my goodness, I might as well just leave the classroom or close the book because it would take me so long to
Mm,
read that last word. So, and I don't think, well, it has gotten a lot better since then.
right.
So I hated school because I hated the structure of the schooling. I loved
Yeah.
education. I still love education. But I asked that question of the severity in this because I didn't know what this was, right? I got so frustrated that one, I'm learning how to read. So I'm in the process of figuring out what all these words, put together, what sounds they make. And then
Mm-hmm.
now I'm getting stuck on this damn last word of the sentence. Like, what's going on here, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's really no longer there anymore. But what have you heard of that?
I can tell you what I have heard of is
Yeah.
neurodiversity. And I think this is a very important term and perspective because we're
Mm,
not all, we're all different and our brains work
right.
differently and we process things differently. And it sounds like you're just processing things a little bit differently as you moved through the
Mm,
learning
mm,
curve. And,
yeah.
we just have this trend of just stamp a label on it. You know what I mean? Oh,
Right.
you're
Right.
this, you're
Yeah.
that, you're
Yeah.
this disorder, that disorder. It's like, okay, can we
Mm, mm,
just be individuals who learn
mm,
differently? And I
mm,
think that's the key. And I think that's starting to catch on. And
Yeah,
also,
yeah.
as the science and the research is improving, we're starting to see that, in particular, people who are dyslexic have some really strong skills that non-dyslexics don't have.
Mm, mm,
So there are
yeah,
some abilities that come with it. So it's pretty
right, right.
interesting. Hmm.
Hmm. Okay. So terrible elementary, middle school, and high school slightly get better. You improve social skills partly through sports and
Hmm.
equipping yourself with the ability, well, finding out that you have this natural inclination to leadership.
Yep.
That seems to do wonders on the academic side and the social side. You move on to college. You still need outside of the classroom support, but by the
Hmm.
end of your college career, I suppose,
Sure.
um, your academic performance is indistinguishable from those that do not need outside of classroom help.
Correct.
It sounds
Hmm.
like so. We haven't touched on how did dyslexia play a role in the dating world?
Well, yeah, and I do write about this. So,
Mm,
you know, I think the thing to really understand is that despite all of outward bound support from my parents, all the learning to persevere, I was traumatized. And I had
mm,
very low self esteem. And it's kind of funny in college. I was in this was I met and dated a man who became, he was a Marine and he became a Marine Corps officer.
mm,
And he
mm,
and I had a great relationship. And it was very important because I understood from him what a really loving relationship is. And somehow I attracted this man, even though I was this low self esteem person. He
mm,
was
mm.
actually my first coach, and he really supported me to kind of stand up to other bullies, but I didn't get it. I didn't
Mm, mm.
understand that I was so traumatized and had such
Yeah,
low self
yeah.
esteem. So
Mm,
that relationship came to an end and life went on. And, I struggled in the dating world, struggled, attracting a good man. And unfortunately, I ended up married to a narcissist who was
mm,
psychologically
mm, mm.
abusive. And in one
Yeah,
case, he
yeah.
was physically abusive. But I understand now that the narcissistic personalities are predators and they are looking
Mm,
for the
mm.
low self esteem partner.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
he found me. And I had to plan and execute an escape.
Mm, mm.
And thank God got out safely because not everybody does. In this
Right,
country,
right.
a lot of people don't understand that 3 women and one man are killed every day in the United States from intimate
Mm,
partner
mm,
abuse.
mm.
So when I got out, I was completely traumatized because I had been psychologically abused by this man for 6 years.
Right,
And
right.
I was so traumatized, I was driving through stop signs and red lights. It was that bad. And I knew I needed help. And
Yeah.
I actually did, I had my surrender moment, which is where I start the book. And I actually looked up at the sky and just said, I'm all yours. I'm turning myself over. I don't know what else to do.
Mm, mm.
And that's when things started to get better. And I went to work with coaches and therapists, and I learned how to heal.
Mm.
And yeah,
Ooh,
yeah. But there's an
it's
important thing to note here. It's one
mm.
thing to survive, it's another thing to learn how to thrive.
Right, right,
And
right.
that's
Oh,
not easy.
right. I bet.
So,
I bet. You can you touch on you touched about having a low self-esteem, and
Mhm.
obviously a lot of this can be related to early childhood development, right?
Mhm.
And teachers and students being on the same side, different sides of the same coin. Um, and so being told by authority figures that you're I'm putting words into their mouths here, but essentially you're not going to amount to nothing, right?
Mhm.
And having that being validated physically and verbally by fellow students, and that how does that play a role into how you view yourself, and how is that different from who you actually are? Because I
Yeah.
feel like the words that we're told, right?
Mhm.
It's really easy for it is often said that just disregard what other people say, and there's a lot of power and truth to that. But at some point, the things that we start to hear, the things that we hear, make their way into our consciousness, and then we
Right.
start telling that to ourselves, and then eventually that becomes our reality, not a true reality, but we live as though that is a reality. So
Yeah.
can you? I'm throwing a lot at you here, but can you
Sure.
elaborate on how that played a role into like demolishing, destroying your self esteem, and then
Sure.
what was the step zero or step one of unlearning that?
Yeah. I think what you're referring to is it was an identity that was imposed on me.
Mm, mm,
And it was combined with trauma. So it makes its way into the brain, for lack of a better term. But I think
yeah.
where you're headed is there's a term in psychology called maladaptive attributes. And
Maladaptive attributes.
yeah, and it often happens with childhood trauma, and it certainly happened to me. And what happens is I don't believe that anything good can come from me. Only bad things come out of me. And good
Mm,
things come
mm,
from the outside world inward. So
yeah.
that's how it kind of manifested in me. Does that answer your
hmm
question?
hmm it does. It does. Now, the second half of that question was what would be like step zero or step
Yeah.
one of unlearning that message that the outside world brought in, and then you took it and embodied that as your identity. What does it take to unlearn all of that?
I'll do that. Yeah. Um, I went to work with an amazing coach, and I write about it in quite great detail as to what came out of those conversations. And his whole premise was you're not broken.
Mm, yeah, yeah,
God doesn't make mistakes. He didn't make you broken.
right,
And
right.
we talked a lot about how I was gaslighted and manipulated
Mm,
into believing that I was broken.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I was, I think, but to take a step back too, I think the first thing that happened was when I reached my surrender point, I kind of wiped the slate clean. It was like, okay, I need to let go of this, but I need to figure out how. So that was what drove me to
Mm,
work with the
mm,
life coach. And then when we started having those conversations, he was so funny. He was like, I said something to the effect of, "No, you don't understand. I can never be successful. I'm just not allowed. I'm dyslexic." And he said to me,
mm,
"Ellen,
mm,
that is the biggest bunch of BS I have ever heard. You have been gaslighted
mm,
and
mm.
manipulated into believing that." And he might as well
Yeah,
have hit
yeah,
me
yeah.
upside the head with a brick. I was like, "Oh my God."
Mm, mm.
And
Yeah.
that's when it all started to unravel.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Wow, that's amazing.
yeah.
That is amazing. Oh, So and how long does, well, in your case, how long did it take to divorce yourself from this identity?
Um, I'd say it took a good 5 to 7 years
Hmm.
of doing this kind
Okay.
of work. Now, with
Yeah.
that said, it happened in increments.
Right. Right.
It's a
Right.
process and it takes time, and there's progress and learning, and then there's healing, and then there's more progress and learning and more healing. So it becomes almost a cycle,
Mm, mm.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
it keeps getting better. It
Right.
keeps
I
getting
bet. I
better.
bet.
And what was really interesting to me was when I began to let go of the part of me that believed I was broken. I actually
Mm.
had to grieve that.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
I had to
Right.
grieve that part of me. Fortunately for me, it didn't take me very long. It took me about two
Mm,
weeks.
mm. Yeah. Yeah.
But that was something I never would have expected, that I had to grieve that piece of
Mm,
me.
mm.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an important note to touch on, because it's like, um you have to grieve because there's death taking place, right?
Exactly.
And that death is a huge part of it. It's like a part of you is being buried and to never be seen again.
Yep.
And so it's really important to touch on that part of grieving the very thing that you're trying to leave behind.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. My identity
huh.
changed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
So you touched on diving earlier on.
Hmm.
I got two questions for you. One, what is the most absolute beautiful diving experience that you've had, and where was
Mm.
it?
Yeah.
And then I'll follow up with a different question after that.
Sure. Actually, and I've done diving in the Caribbean and the Keys and Florida and places like that, Cayman Islands. And those are certainly
Mm,
beautiful dives. But the most
hmm.
spectacular dive is actually a dive that I did at Nubble Lighthouse in York, Maine.
Your Maine,
In Maine, yep. And here's what happened.
really?
Yeah, I was going for my advanced certification. Excuse
Hmm.
me. And it was a night dive. It was part of the requirements, and I've done a bunch of night dives, so this was no big deal for me.
Hmm.
And it
Yeah.
was probably in May, so the water was pretty cold and the sun was just setting. And my
Hmm.
instructor and I, we go in and we have a plan. We're going to do work through some underwater navigation skills, and we did that, and
Hmm.
we completed that, and we were headed back towards the shoreline. This is a shore dive. You drive up, you walk in right off the rocks and dive into the water.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's very convenient. And we had a school of juvenile fish. I can't even imagine how big the school was. And they were fish about this big.
Mm-hmm.
And they came right up the shore and they went right by us. Now it's dark at this point, and they're a very
Mm-hmm.
silver color. And we were
Mm.
completely engulfed in this school of fish that was just whipping by, and they're
Wow.
reflecting our dive lights, so it's like this silver
Oh,
shimmering that's
right.
happening. And I would reach out and I
Mm,
would try and touch them, and they would just move away, and then
mm,
I'd pull my hand back and a couple bounced off my cheeks. It
mm.
was I was we were just in awe of the moment. And this is in my book, but it was absolutely spectacular. I had been diving since I was 17. Like I said,
Mm.
300 dives. My instructor's probably
Yeah.
got 500 or 1,000 dives under his belt.
Mm,
And
mm.
it only lasted for about 5 minutes, maybe 10.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And we were just in awe of this incredible experience. And then all of a sudden they were just gone, and it was over.
Mm,
And we reached the shoreline, and I took my regulator out of my mouth and said, "Oh my God, have you ever
mm.
experienced anything like that?" He just looked at me and he said, "Ellen, I've never seen anything like that.
Wow.
So it was really an
Amazing.
amazing experience. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Ah, that's beautiful. That is beautiful.
It was
The
great.
second question that I had was, what is your absolute earliest memory as far as you can remember?
I remember going to a fair with my parents, and I was
Mm.
probably no older than two. And I
Wow.
remember, yeah, I remember there was a bouncy house, and the bouncy house sprung a leak, and the whole thing collapsed, and I
Yeah.
was really upset by that.
Oh,
But I got to do a pony ride. They had pony rides for the kids.
okay.
And
Okay.
actually, when after my dad passed, and both my parents have passed away now for about 5 years, so
Mm.
mom about 10 years. And my sister and I were going through old pictures, and I actually
Mm.
found some pictures from that event.
Oh,
So
no way.
it confirmed my memory. Yeah, yeah,
Wow. Wow. That is so cool.
yeah.
Ellen, it's we're at the top of the hour already. It's just
Sure.
amazing. Time flew by. Um, as we're coming to a close here,
Hmm.
what are some takeaways here that
Sure.
people can walk away with, whether they have dyslexia or not. But let's touch on those that have dyslexia and what they have come to believe about themselves,
Yeah.
and how they can start to break those identities that they have embodied that
Yeah.
are not true.
Well, I think the first thing to understand is you're not broken. And if you feel broken or you feel less than, you've been gaslighted,
Yeah.
just like I
Mm.
was. And
Yeah.
as a matter of fact, the science is really starting to catch up and show that you have incredible talents that you may not even be aware of. And there's a
Mm.
great book out there called The Dyslexic Advantage, and it's written by
Mm.
two doctors and husband and wife team. And they actually dive
Yeah.
into the abilities, not the disabilities. And that,
Mm.
reading
Mm.
that for me was a game changer. So you're
Mm.
not broken. Please be mindful that you probably have a low self esteem issue or low self worth. You may not even be
Mm.
conscious of it because it's so embedded in your identity. You
Right. Right.
may have be carrying around trauma. And I got good news, you don't have to carry that around, even if you're not consciously aware of it. I highly recommend working with a credentialed professional. And please make sure they are credentialed.
Mm.
There's a lot of fruitcakes out there who will be more than happy to take your money.
Mm.
So
Bet.
please choose carefully. And if something in your gut says that this isn't right, get out of that situation. Listen to your
Mm.
gut.
Mm.
But you can heal, you can thrive, but it's going to take work and commitment. But you deserve it because you don't have to carry that around. And so,
Yeah. Yeah. You certainly do deserve to carry a less light burden,
mhm,
especially one that you don't deserve to carry.
right.
Hmm. Alan, it's been amazing having you on the Moses Kabandana podcast. If people
Thank
want
you.
to learn more about you, where do they go?
Sure. So I have my author webpage is ellenbusch.com. Just remember the C, so it's B with CH, like Anheuser-Busch. Everybody gets that, like we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, and Instagram is ebush1500. So come find me.
Awesome. Awesome. Alan, happy Monday to you. It's been great
Happy
having you
Monday
on.
to you too. Thank you. I've enjoyed being a